I'm going to roll straight into community emergency response. Michael Wood had volunteered or been volunteered to provide this session. He was called away unexpectedly, and Larry Kilmar from Tampa's Lowry Park Zoo agreed to take over Michael's presentation. And from that, Larry is going to go immediately into the training, the presentation on training. So I'm turning the microphone over to Larry.
Thank you. I hope I do justice to Michael's presentation, so please bear with me. The community emergency response teams were actually founded as a basic neighborhood neighbors helping neighbors, strictly as volunteers. That's how this whole program started. It allows citizens to take a more active role in emergency response in their own neighborhood before the real help arrives, as they say. CERT teams have evolved in many communities through the local public service professionals. It started actually in Los Angeles in 1985 when it was recognized that the city responders during an earthquake couldn't get there quickly or effectively, obviously due to all the damage in the surrounding communities. And that's how these teams were actually first started. And again, it was neighbors helping out neighbors and assisting with the response teams as they arrived. This can be used for all hazards in your community: flood, fire, hurricanes, chemical spills, terrorism. It's amazing how your community can actually rally around these efforts and give first responders a lot of important data as to what's going on as they're arriving. CERT is now promoted through FEMA, and it's a partner with the Citizen Corps. So this has really caught on in all 50 states. Trainers are typically found in the community response, former emergency responders that are now retired and have decided to go out and help in this process. You have to be, CERT team members are considered good Samaritans, and an important part here are protected from liability under the 1997 Volunteer Protection Act. There's a lot of misinformation about this, that as a good Samaritan you can be sued and so on and so forth. But common sense would indicate, as long as you are using common sense, that you are protected under that Volunteer Act. Training is both in lecture form and actual literature is provided to the trainers so they get a full width and breadth of what they need to be trained in. This is a fairly substantial volunteer commitment in the community. There's no question about it. It has to be, as they say, all in, all out. CERT is now seen as a way to supplement professional emergency responders, as I said earlier, but it's not a replacement. I want to repeat, this is not a replacement for emergency responders. Those people are specially trained in how to deal with the emergency when they arrive. And certainly, CERT volunteers, do not suppress large fires, enter heavily damaged buildings, dangerous structures, or clean up hazardous materials. That stands to reason. When it comes to training, the overall program review is basic efforts in emergency management for these people. It's about mitigation, response, recovery, and redevelopment. Basic fire suppression is also taught, but again, underlying these people do not actually suppress fires or deal with these hazardous situations. Life-saving and medical assessment is also provided to CERT team members, how to stabilize victims and how to communicate effectively to first responders. This is extremely important. Make sure that accurate information is getting to the first responders as they arrive. When we talk about light search and rescue, that means limited physical demands on a CERT member. You're not going to go into a collapsed building with a rescue dog, but you might be able to help people that are on the fringe of those facilities and get them secured. It's organizing, it's planning, again, in support of the first responders. And it's also assisting in a effective search. Again, helping first responders to realize that perhaps there are some other victims in another part of the area that they may not be aware of, so that the first responders are making the best and most efficient use of their time. You have to be careful of high-stress situations. Again, in most cases, CERT members don't do this regularly. Might find that that particular disaster situation is highly stressful. We're talking heart attacks, strokes, and so on and so forth. So again, there has to be some assessment of the CERT members as to their abilities to do these things. It's necessary that all participants take a test before they are considered CERT members. This is a written exam, and again, emphasizing training on all of these points of view so that the people are responding properly. Most emergency management staffs will review the CERT team members. They view them as very positive to the process, and they can be beneficial. However, there is still areas in this country where there is some resistance to this, but I think over time, and certainly the fact that this program has received great accolades from first responders, that's becoming less and less an issue. CERT teams have their own organization. They have, within their own organizations, can help with situations in their own companies. Think about developing perhaps your own CERT membership group within your organization if it's big enough. It may not be big enough for you to do, but again, this just helps facilitate first responders when a disaster occurs. And again, disaster intelligence is just reporting to officials the extent of the damages within the community, and this helps them when they get to the site. These are some helpful websites that you can go to get more information. Again, Michael wishes he could be here, but he certainly is the expert in this area and can give you more details. And again, I'll be happy to answer any questions at the end of my next presentation. So I'm just going to keep on going. All of this is tied in. I think it's the irony is that while no one sat down together and put all of these presentations together, there's definitely a common thread throughout all of this, and I think it's rather heartwarming to see that we're really consistent and on the same track. Specific to staff training, I can't emphasize enough the importance of drills on all of your staff. When I said at least twice a year, in the zoo community, we're required through accreditation to actually have 5 drills, 5 different kinds of drills, and that's up to us to decide the frequency. We're required to do at least each one of those once a year. I would suggest twice a year if you're going to worry about hurricane preparedness or fire drills or so on and so forth, and I'll explain why as I go through this. You must include all members of your staff, and this does include the CEO. I know oftentimes they're too busy. They're never too busy to do a drill, because oftentimes they'll be the ones that are out of touch with what's really going on in the facility and might actually be causing a distraction. It's very important that you evaluate immediately after each drill. I cannot emphasize that enough. Not the next day, immediately thereafter, because while everybody's memories are fresh and you can get the actual information you need, this does not take a long time and extremely vital. You then can revise your protocols depending on the things that you found out that didn't work. When we have started drills here many years ago, there was some resistance to this. Now the staff has embraced this because they see the benefit of the drills. As you progress and mature in this, it's important that you include your local emergency first responders in the training exercises. They are more than willing to help you. You just have to ask. And they also are required to use these exercises as part of their training, so you're helping them out. It's important to have your key staff review these plans and collaborate within your industry. Hand this plan to one of your cohorts in another museum, library, zoo, wherever it may be, and say, hey, read this, see what you see in this. I've looked at it too much. I can't pick out any problems with it. You'd be surprised the response you get back. And live drills, by live drills I mean that you are actually performing an emergency drill with a patient, obviously not one that's under distress, but one that's being a perfect actor. The case we use in zoos is we actually, because we do have animal escapes and we do have to use large weaponry occasionally, weapons are dispatched. We are in the zoo during visitor hours and actually conducting a drill. Why is that important? So the staff get used to having visitors around. Now, we do post a sign in front of the zoo that says at any given time in the next 4 hours there might be a drill, weapons will be visible, they're not armed, you will be safe. This is taking the cruise line industry model and using it. This is important. People react differently during live drills than they do during the standard drill. And you'd be surprised. You get your adrenaline rush going, people get excited. You really see how your staff can respond in these situations. You need to have your staff trained in CPR. We've talked about that, but make sure you're in accordance with company guidelines with that, because that can be a legal trap. Now, why do we do all this? Well, if we're not protecting animals like we are in a zoo, you're protecting historical non-replaceable items, and that's why it's important for us to do the best we can as stewards of that information or animals so that we are protecting them in a professional manner. Now, on the yearly preparation, on the clerical side, you need to review and update your protocols. Set a date when you're going to do that. Whether that's the month of January or the month of May, do it religiously. Make sure someone's in charge of that so that you do not miss the opportunity. You'd be surprised how fast a year can go by. Update your employee contact information. Phone numbers change. You don't want to be chasing that down 2 days before a hurricane striking. In January, in the zoo world, at least in Tampa, we select what's called our ride-out team. We do that in January so we're not chasing people down in June when the first hurricane arrives saying who's going to stay tonight and ride out this hurricane. Rarely do we have to change anybody in that period of time. And determine who your point person is going to be for the emergency event. Have somebody own this process. And make sure you're checking your emergency supplies. Again, all things we talked about all today. Contact your city officials, whether that be your police chief, your mayor, your fire chief. Let them know what you're doing. Invite them to lunch. Explain what you're doing. On the day of the emergency, they'll appreciate the fact that they know how well trained you are or what they can do to help you. Again, back on yearly preparations, make certain that all your, I know this sounds like, wow, really, why wouldn't we be checking generators? But you'd be surprised how many generators have run out of fuel at the most inopportune time during a power outage. Reaffirm the needs, expectations, and commitments of your vendors and suppliers. Why do I bring that up? In the case of the animal world, we have to have food available to us. If we have trees down and can't get vehicles in for food supplies for more than a week. We typically have a week's supply worth of food on site, but if trucks can't get in for 2 weeks, where's that food going to be? That needs to be decided early on, not days before the event's going to occur if it's a hurricane. And determine exactly when facility inspections will occur each year. Don't leave it to chance. If you do them more than once a year, try to do it on a quarterly basis so people understand the second and fourth quarters when we're going to do our facility inspection. And of course, we all have limited budgets, so you have to prioritize what facility adjustments you need to make. After the emergency of the natural disaster, the point person needs to contact and evaluate everyone to see how well you performed. That's an excellent time to determine what areas of weakness you may have. And you will have areas of weakness. There is no perfect plan. And that gives you a chance to review your effectiveness and make your adjustments at that time. Do not wait. Do it while it's fresh in your mind. And then that also gives you a chance to adjust your training and drills accordingly for the future. I had to throw in another animal picture. Since I have the mouse, I get to control the pictures. So, okay, why train? It provides your staff an opportunity to become familiar with the protocols. Everybody assumes they know what's going to happen when a fire would occur, a flood, or an emergency. You'd be surprised how ill-prepared we are if you have not drilled. You want a calm, collective staff performing these functions. You don't want people running around screaming unprepared. Under live drills, this really ramps up your adrenaline and really tests your staff preparedness. You'd be surprised how many people appear to be calm on the surface and when given a live drill situation absolutely fall apart. And working with first responders, I cannot stress that enough, how valuable that is not only for them but for yourself, and also how effective it is in them knowing your facility and where to go to get to the emergency the fastest way possible. We've talked about this in previous train. Cannot emphasize enough. Don't discount it. Don't let your staff members say, oh, we don't need to train. We know what to do. Train. Any questions? The question is, what kind of animal is that? That's an okapi, O-K-A-P-I. One of the last mammals discovered in the 20th century, 1902, 1903. Lives in the Uturi forest of Africa. About 6,000 of these animals left. So I'm going to turn off my mic now and take other questions. Okay. I'd be happy to explain what a tabletop exercise is. That's one where you actually would sit in your conference room or boardroom or wherever that may be, whatever's convenient for you, and you talk about a particular situation. You may have a map of your facility, your building, whatever it may be. In case of a fire, let's talk about what are the accessible routes in and out in a fire situation. I think we all know where the doors are. But if we know where the doors are we certain there may not be a fire behind that door? What's the alternate doorway to go to? If you're upstairs, how do you get downstairs quickly to get out? If you're upstairs and trapped, where do you go to get out? In the case of hurricanes, it's like, okay, we know where the generators are, we know where the fuel is, where's the backup water supply? Where is the maintenance shed in comparison to this building? If I'm here and it's pitch black at midnight, how do I get to that building even with a flashlight? You'd be surprised how different your facility looks at night with no lights. So a lot of this is just putting it, what they mean by tabletop is you're actually putting it on top of the table, and whether you're mocking it up on a piece of paper, using a chart, using a map, you're going through your facility and deciding this is how we will handle it. Then you go out and do it in person. Yeah. The question is, will I talk about the pros and cons of tabletop versus drill? I think tabletop is that very first step, would be the introduction of your staff to this process. It will never replace the drill. The drill is actually physically going out and I'll take the zoo for instance, animal escape. We appoint one person as the animal. They start walking around. The rest of the staff has to be able to corral that animal and get it in a position where it can either be darted with tranquilizer drugs or hopefully moved back into this exhibit. It's a little different when you're on the ground doing it than sitting in the comfort of a conference room saying, oh yes, I would just do the following. Case in point, we drill repeatedly here for all of the 5 drills that I mentioned, which are fire, keeper down, visitor down, animal escape, venomous snake bite, and severe weather. In an animal escape, we now can collect an animal very quickly and efficiently, quietly responding to the emergency, and the animal goes back into its exhibit most of the time without us having to use tranquilizer drugs. That started as a tabletop, explaining how we would corral the animal, moving to the drill with a human being the animal escape, and then actually having an animal get out. The progression is it makes sense. It's a good training exercise. If you don't have live animals, you have art and artifacts. Deal with how you would evacuate that building if you had a night event going on and you were full of people, 5 times the number of people that you would have in the room. What's the best way to get people out if the fire starts in the kitchen or the fire starts here or the fire starts there? Then actually go out and drill that. Ask your public, excuse me, we're doing a drill right now. Would you mind helping us participate? They're going to love it. The live drills that we've done at the zoo when we actually are running across campus with firearms that are not loaded, let me qualify that. People are saying, wow, this is great. You're actually working on how to protect me as a visitor. They're actually very thankful of that. That started as a tabletop exercise.